Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in this webinar about data security for AI in education. My name is Timothy Boettcher. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm an SVP of go-to-market at AvePoint. And joining me today is Kevin. Kevin, please introduce yourself.
Hey folks, Kevin Walter, based in Chicago. I am Netrix's field CTO for AI and security.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And we're super excited to talk to you today. So today we're going to be talking a lot about AI and trust, but primarily through the lens of Microsoft Copilot, and more specifically, Microsoft Copilot in the campus, in the classroom, in the education space. So we'll be highlighting a bit about the growing adoption of AI in education and some of the implications that this raises about security, privacy, compliance, and of course, trust. And we'll share some use cases, some real world use cases and some examples of where we're seeing Copilot and generative AI being useful, and then get into some of the best practices and approach to getting ready for Copilot in your campus, in your institution, and more specifically, getting your data ready for Copilot, which is the topic of this presentation. So that's what we're going to cover today. But before we get too deep into it, a quick introduction about ourselves and our companies. So AvePoint, if you haven't heard of us, we're a software company, been around for about 20 odd years now in the Microsoft space, from SharePoint all the way up to Microsoft 365. We have a confidence platform. We have a platform of solutions that help you extend your investments in your Microsoft platform. With security, compliance, resilience, and a whole bunch of other tools that help automate governance and security lifecycle. And that's what we do. So Microsoft Partner of the Year winner multiple years, most recently in education. We work with a lot of different companies, and we work with a lot of different educational institutions already as well. And as a software vendor, we love partnering with our SI partners and consulting partners such as Netrix.
Yes, Netrix, we are a Microsoft consulting partner, been around for a number of years and cover the entire gamut of the Microsoft suite. So helping organizations adopt and deploy the tools that we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So let's talk a little bit about why trust is essential, right? Because one of the things that we've seen, and Kevin, I'm sure you've seen this as well, is that we are seeing some pretty big upticks in the way that we talk about generative AI and AI in education. I remember doing a webinar I think it was barely 2 years ago, and we were talking about AI and how good it is. And I remember in that webinar having to explain to everybody, what is AI, what is machine learning, how is this useful? And then suddenly here we are, like a year or two later, and now it's like the topic on everybody's tongue, right? We've seen that explosive growth with ChatGPT and with things like Microsoft Copilot. And some of the stats up here that we're seeing on the screen is that 95% of educators have tried using AI at least once. But what we're seeing is that leaders who adopt AI have seen a 3.4 times return in investment straight away. So, Kevin, where would you see that? That's in some of the productivity and savings around different areas. What are some of the things you're seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, as users become proficient with these tools and start integrating them into their flow of work, we absolutely see return on investment with terms of time savings and productivity, and ultimately supporting your pre-existing objectives.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, and we'll get into it a little bit more when we get into the more specific use cases, obviously AI is a broad brush, right? There's a lot of different ways to apply and use AI. Generative AI is a tool, and there's obviously different use cases and different ways you can use it, and things that it's good for, things that it's less good for. But ultimately, there is a use case or a tool for every single role and every single task. And we'll see that as we go along, that there's a lot of opportunity here still for growth in this space. But a very common theme when we're talking about this, when we're talking about AI and using AI, and you'll notice it doesn't matter if it's Microsoft, if it's IBM, if it's Salesforce, or whoever it is, right? Or even the White House in this instance. When we're talking about generative AI and we're talking about using AI, there is a big thread about trust, right? So, Kevin, what are some of the reasons that you think, what's holding us back? Why don't we implicitly just trust it? Why is there a lot of noise around this at the moment?
It all comes down to what data you have in your environment, because the AI relies on the data you have that is feeding it the grounding, as we say, in terms of what content it's drawing from. And so being able to then understand the requirements as you move towards any type of generative AI solution in terms of what data privacy constraints you have in your environment today. Do you have good governance, good data security guardrails in place? And ultimately, the better data your system has, the more reliable information it will provide back to you in terms of generated content. And that's where we get the trust element from.
Yeah, very interesting. I think like I said, a couple of years ago, we were having to spell this out for people, but I think the general awareness is raising up now. Everybody's familiar with the garbage in and garbage out principle. And that certainly applies to when you're using generative AI like ChatGPT or something out on the internet where it's pulling results from anywhere and you don't really have control over it. But well, one of the things we'll get into about Copilot in a minute is obviously, like you said, the data and where it's pulling its data from is important. But we know that as you're using it, as you're receiving results, those data privacy concerns, the data security and governance concerns, and just people are looking for that confidence, looking for that guidance on what are the different ways or what are the things we can implement for trust, right? So I think with that in mind, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's talk a little bit about Copilot in education specifically. So not talking about the other kinds of AI tools that are out there, but specifically, Kevin, can you tell us a little bit more about Microsoft's generative AI offerings?
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, there are a number of AI-related offerings that virtually cover every role, every scenario, every type of task that an organization faces across the ecosystem, which we'll focus on today, which is modern work, which really means the Copilot that lives inside of your everyday applications like Word, Outlook, and PowerPoint, to name a few.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, right? And Copilot, or the term Copilot, is used commonly as a shorthand for AI in the Microsoft space, but more explicitly, if you think of OpenAI or the Microsoft AI engine as the brain being put into robots, each one of these apps is like a little robot that lives somewhere, and it's using the same brain, it's using the same engine, but they're all slightly different implementations that are geared to different tasks, right? But today we're mainly talking around the Copilots that are in M365. So yeah, there's a lot out there. It's definitely worth researching and looking into. But tell us a little bit more about some of the implications of Copilot for Microsoft 365.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, you mentioned trust, and that's really evident in how Copilot is designed. So the secure by design principle means that not only does it inherit the data that exists in your organization's tenant today, but also all of the security, compliance, and privacy policies. So Copilot respects all of those. It respects permission boundaries. It's designed so that your data never leaves the organization or the Microsoft 365 service boundary, which is an important distinction when you compare it with other consumer grade tools.
I think that's pretty important. So what are some examples that you've seen in the education space when it comes to actually using this in a useful way?
Yeah, I mean, important distinction too, as we talked earlier about all of the different Copilots. There is a Microsoft Copilot on the web that every organization, every user, every individual has access to today without subscribing to any additional licensing. So you can go to copilot.microsoft.com, and that's where on the left-hand side of the screen, we talk about Microsoft Copilot. This is what's grounded in web data. For example, if you wanted to research curricula, outlining agendas, summarizing websites or articles, or even manipulating text if you want to grab something from a web page and move it into a table, for example. Contrast that with Copilot for Microsoft 365, which has that additional layer of work context. So grounding in the data that lives inside of your Microsoft 365 environment, specifically OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, for example. But if you have internal data, for example, summarizing internal reports, Copilot for Microsoft 365, as you add that layer on, has access to that content. So it's very easy, very good in terms of leveling content or creating information based on what exists in your environment today.
Interesting. So would you say that's a good case? Like, how can you help reframe that or rephrase that in a reason of why I would gravitate to using Copilot for Microsoft 365 as opposed to going out and copying and pasting stuff in ChatGPT, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think the security aspect alone really stands out in the sense that all of the data, as I said, never leaves the Microsoft 365 service boundary. So in essence, none of your data that is in your Microsoft 365 tenant is used to retrain public large language models. That shared service is isolated and separated from the data that you have in your environment. So in essence, you continue to own your data. It never leaves your environment, and the user is always in control of what they're using and interacting with the different Copilot experiences.
Got it. And I think just personally, in addition to the security boundaries and being able to leverage your existing information, as you said, I think there's a convenience factor too. I think this is something I've personally found, instead of having to copy and paste stuff out of Word or out of PowerPoint or out of whatever I'm working on to go ask a question and come back, you can do it right from within the app as well. So I think the convenience factor can't be overlooked either, in addition to the security.
Yeah, that when we talk about gaining efficiency and productivity savings, you're spot on. When and AI, the use cases for it in general, when we think of all of those different copilots and all of the different AI tools in the ecosystem, being able to leverage a tool that's right within your everyday already existing flow of work is important for that.
So these are some simple examples. What about a more advanced example of a prompt or something that might be a bit more specific?
Yeah, I mean, a couple examples here that are more use case driven. These are areas where the more information, one of the things that we're seeing, the more information that you feed into a prompt in any generative AI context, the better result you're going to get, the more trust is inherent in what you're getting back. So, from that sense, you can see a couple examples of preparing curricula or summarizing information that's found on the web. Um, and that skill, the ability to craft these prompts effectively, is one of the trends that we're seeing as well. The idea that prompt engineering becomes a new skill that information workers, especially students that are entering the workforce, are starting to acquire and become proficient with.
Yeah, I love that first example there that sort of frames it with setting your expectations of what you're expecting to get back. Like, hey, you are an AI who's an expert in physics, and this is my question. So I want you to reply to me in a certain way, and that really sets the scene for getting a good answer back. Actually, on that, so I know not everybody is asking physics related questions and other stuff, but here's an example of a real world prompt that anybody can use these days, right? If you have access to Copilot already in your tenant, I'm not sure if you're on the a trial license or if you have access to a demo environment, but this is one that I've been using a lot. That's been super helpful because if you're anything like us and you're working in Teams and you're working in Outlook and you've got stuff in SharePoint and you've got stuff coming in everywhere, sometimes it's very easy to lose track of everybody who's messaging you in a chat or in a team or in an email and all the things that you've got to get on top of. So quite often in the mornings, I'll come in and paste this prompt into my Copilot for Microsoft 365 and actually get a personalized response, right? And it will go through, it's almost like having an intern or assistant ready, not always 100% correct, but good enough to save me a lot of time and summarize, hey, here are some things that you didn't do and here's what we recommend, and here's a suggested reply as well to save me some time in getting back to it. So I think as we go along, we're going to see lots of different examples like this, and I've seen some tools and features out there for saving and sharing prompts, and I think there's some more functionality on the way coming towards that. But for now, we're all just sharing these prompts with each other and sharing these tips with each other as we all learn and grow together. So. All right, so this is some of the good stuff about Copilot in terms of the productivity, the time saving. But let's talk a little bit more deeper about why your data security is essential, right? Because you want to realize these benefits, and you want to realize these benefits safely and securely and with full trust. But how do we define what success looks like? So I really like this report here. It came from there was an IBM report about generating ROI with AI. And it breaks out to go through a very short summary. I really recommend you read it. It's very valuable. But it recommends 6 key capabilities that institutions, schools, organizations need to implement to get a good ROI on AI to be high performing. And what you'll notice here, so it's talking about, set your vision and strategy about what you expect to get out of it. Set up an AI operating model and, identify responsibility and ownership and create your AI engineering ops, have talent, talent and skills, set up your training. What you're seeing obviously is a governance approach, right? This is a mix of people, processes, and technology. There's no silver bullet. Okay, if there was a silver bullet, then we all wouldn't be here today, and this would be a much easier conversation. But every institution, every organization is different, and but this is a great. I really like this because it really lays out very simply what the key principles are. And this is how Microsoft and, of course, Netrix have synthesized this into an actionable approach. And obviously, this is based on some of the Microsoft best practices, some of your own best practices. Do you want to talk us through this a little bit more, Kevin, about how you approach with your clients in helping them get ready for rolling out something like Copilot?
Sure. Yeah. The two work streams that act in parallel here. One is organizational value on the top side here, ensuring that you understand what are the processes, what are the use cases I'm trying to leverage AI for. You can continue that through in terms of how we take our targeted training approach through role-based focus groups that allow us to continue to build on that prompt engineering skill and continue to identify new scenarios, extensibility capabilities of Copilot or other generative AI or Microsoft 365 solutions. But then speaking about the technology, on the technical readiness side, we always recommend first, let's do an objective inventory of what type of data you have in your environment today. We've talked about a couple of concepts related to how that trust feeds into the results of the AI. So understanding what governance guardrails that you either have in place today and need to be refined for the new generative AI era, or maybe theirs is starting from scratch and we're deploying things anew. All of those things support each other as you continue to build and mature your data strategy as well. So all the way through to dashboards and usage reports to tracking and integrating with a data warehouse, for example. But as you work on these two work streams in parallel, they ultimately work to build your trust in the AI solution.
Yeah, fantastic. What I love about this is it's a good roadmap or framework for approaching it. And this is where you can really take those lofty ambitions from the IBM report and put it into something actionable, right? This is something that Netrix can walk in and actually help hold your hand in doing, right? And guide the different players and the different stakeholders through these activities and get a quantifiable outcome at the end. So coming back to that report for just a second, I want to revisit this and dive a bit deeper. So knowing that we have a very broad area to cover, right? Vision, operating models, strategy, business org value, as Kevin was saying, what we want to spend a little bit of time in this webinar diving into is the data side of things. And I think this is a really great encapsulation of what is needed on the data readiness side. We're all familiar with the term, garbage in, garbage out, that kind of thing. Attacking it is a different beast though, right? And I really like the way it says, hey, your organization or your institution needs to have core capabilities around simplifying, automating, controlling, and critically securing access to your data. And the reason this is important, so AvePoint got together with AIM, which is the Association for Intelligent Information Management, and we did a joint study to get the state of play in terms of data readiness and how people feel about their information management for getting ready for AI. And this is a mix of statistics from that report and different sources. But what we found really interesting here is that a majority of executives or IT executives say that a high level of data quality is essential to AI success, right? They recognize that, hey, our data needs to be good, our data needs to be clean, we need to have good data quality to be successful with what we're getting back from our generative AI like copilots. 2/3 of them don't trust their own data, right? So I think that's a really fascinating disconnect there, where you've got people who are saying, yeah, we recognize that our data is super important, but we don't really trust it and we don't really know how to tackle it, right? We've experienced some significant implementation issues when we've tried to roll out AI related to data quality and security, and we really don't know where to start in terms of managing it. So this is where obviously organizations like AvePoint help, and together with organizations like Netrix, to be able to come up with a framework to help you prepare and secure and optimize your data ready for rolling out a Copilot. So let's talk a little bit about preparing your data. So Kevin, why don't you talk us through this example here?
Yeah, I mean, you can see we're right inside of the flow of work with Microsoft Word, and we're asking Copilot to draft an executive summary document. So this obviously has the ability to create the content right inside of where we're already working, where we would already be drafting this. And it has the ability also to reference content that exists in our Microsoft 365 environment.
Yeah, and referencing the content that's in your environment is where that really important part is, right? Because the last thing you want, let's say you've got some curriculum in there that's like 5 years old, 10 years old. I had one client we were speaking to recently did a demo, and they were testing it out in their pilot, and they were getting results from a document that was 18 years old, right? Which may not be bad. That may be a valuable document, but also it may not be a valuable document. So knowing where your data is and knowing its relevance and how clean, how relevant it is, whether it's accurate, whether it's not something out of date, that's super important, right? So again, this is one of our recommendations. So together, one of the things that we always, both Netrix and AvePoint, recommend to our clients is that we recommend running a data cleanliness scan to understand what your data landscape looks like, right? So weed out your old, redundant, obsolete, and trivial. We call it ROT for shorthand, ROT, your duplicate files, your old files, and stuff that's not important. Maybe a memo that was saved that's not really critical, or, some old reference files that aren't really useful for generating results. So typically this could be, spend a lot of time diving through all of your data repositories, trying to find that and clean that up. But one of the things that we can do is help accelerate that with a report or a scan that will go through your environment, identify everything, and help create you a report of where all these old versions are, which departments, which areas, which sites, which campuses they belong to, help you identify who the data owners are, where you've got opportunities to make significant savings in terms of cleaning up, both for your storage costs, but also for data quality. And just making sure that the content in your environment is fresh. And I think that's one of the things that we work with a lot of clients to help them get that data estate in order. So just an example here of what a ROT report might look like, showing you how many files it found, where they're containing, what size you can potentially clean off, where you've got old versions and old copies of documents lying around. So it's a really useful way to start tackling that problem. So let's talk a little bit about data access and data security. So you prepared your data. Now we want to get it secure. Why would we want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you can see the Microsoft 365 chat experience here. A user asking Copilot to list all the files I have access to with the word password. And on its face, you can imagine that if you've ever put a password in plain text and saved it somewhere that's now accessible to your Copilot assistant. Again, bear in mind, Copilot is secure by design. So only the things you already have access to are going to be surfaced here. But if you haven't put the right guardrails in place, if you haven't determined where content may be highly sensitive and or highly exposed, this is going to pose a challenge as your users start to adopt Copilot, because certainly some of the more enterprising users are going to try this the first thing on day one.
Yeah, and I think you raised a good point there. Like, this is not fear mongering about Copilot by any means. Like, your users can do this today in Office Search. If they open up Office Search and they start searching for stuff, Search is security trimmed. It will only return them results that they'll have access to in much the same way that Copilot's security trimmed. It's only going to return you stuff that you have access to. But the question that a lot of our clients have is, how can we be confident in exactly what our users have access to, right? One of the great advantages of the Microsoft 365 and SharePoint platform, right, is that it's easy to share files, hence SharePoint, not lockdown security point, right? It's making it easy to collaborate, easy for users to get work done. But of course, there's always that balance and that risk about, well, are we oversharing? Has HR accidentally shared a document to their whole organization? That's not Copilot's fault, right? That's somebody clicked the wrong button on that side, but we want to be confident in that. So, this is where we recommend running a security audit and being able to run a scan across your environment to get a full heat map risk assessment, to get some insights into where are your potentially risky files, right? Where's your potential oversharing? Where have we potentially got guest users accessing stuff that they shouldn't be accessing stuff from the outside? And really you can see a heat map in the top right there, and getting that visibility into sensitivity versus exposure to really give you an insight into, okay, how am I going to prioritize this activity? Right? If Kevin or myself are walking into a client to help them tune up their permissions on Microsoft 365, the can be a very broad landscape. We want to be able to attack the most highest priority ones first. And just to that as well, being able to then not only look at those security permissions, but be able to enforce sharing rules and different kinds of policies, and find different kinds of violations and compliance. And I think, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, this is already pre-configured with like 300 different best practice templates, right?
Yeah, I mean, our methodology for performing these assessments involves taking in the data, scanning the environment that's already out there. So you have an objective inventory of what that risk might be. So then you can continue down the path of, as we saw earlier on our journey, automating the governance through different policy creation that supports your Copilot journey going forward.
Yeah. And one of the other things I like is there's the option to do a sanity check. So you can actually type in a user's name and see what they have permission and access to. And this is great because if especially for those of us sometimes who are involved in these pilots, you get put on the spot and they say, how can you be sure? Your leadership or a stakeholders come in and say, how can you be sure that Kevin only has access to these documents? Or how can you be sure what they're seeing? This gives you that validation, right? You can pop a name in there or pop a group in, and it will tell you what are the security groups, what are the teams, what are the things that this user has access to, so you can actually look at it and get a good idea of what their Copilot results are going to be. So I really like that. Finally, so we talked about preparing your data, we talked about securing your data. Now we want to talk a little bit about optimizing, right? So it's really great to do a data scrub, do a cleanup, and get everything looking pristine. It's really great to then do a risk assessment and an audit, find all your permissions, and then immediately fix them from that same dashboard. Be able to remove those oversharing links and get rid of the guest users who you don't need anymore. But it'd be good to put something in place to prevent it from getting to this spot in the first place, right? Like a lot of these M365 environments grow very organically. There's often a lot of fluid usage of the system. And one of the things that we want to do is put some guardrails in place, just like you're saying, Kevin, to try and make sure that it makes it easy for people to do the right thing.
Yeah, we're essentially ensuring that going forward, after we do that point in time snapshot to understand which guideposts we're at and our direction that we're taking, that we put something in place that's sustainable. Because as you said, the amount of data that users are creating is exploding.
Yeah, so just before we wrap up here, a couple of success stories or a couple of examples between the two of us. Obviously, AvePoint and Netrix partner a lot on a bunch of different things. But one of the stories I'd like to share is working with a university in Virginia. We were helping them roll out Microsoft 365 and Teams, and they had a bit of a hesitation because faculty and students were going to be in the same tenant, and there was questions and concerns raised about, hey, how can we be sure about what the sharing is happening? How can we be sure about, the permissions are cordoned off or firewalled off correctly? And how can we really have that confidence that we can have two completely different sets of users cohabitating in the same tenant? And by implementing some of these automation tools, like we were showing before, some of these governance guardrails and policy guardrails and some of these reporting insights, we're able to help them achieve that. And I think you had a very similar story as well.
Yeah, I mean, same situation, faculty and students in the same environment. And in this K-12 academy, they offered their courses, recorded courses in video form. And the requirement they had was to make those publicly available. Anonymous users on the internet can go and review those videos. Now, that required that the parent-tenant settings be open, but that obviously creates some pause for concern on everything else other than those videos. So what we were able to do with that organization was put some logical workspaces or security containers in place so that all of those course videos were publicly available, but we had automated governance around everything else in the environment. So in essence, users couldn't overshare beyond the things that were already allowed.
Yeah, so to use a layman's term, yeah, you had like a shop front with a house at the back, and you have to keep the front door open for the visitors to come in, but you needed that extra layer of security in between the two to keep them from getting into the back. Yeah, fantastic.
Exactly.
All right, so that brings us to wrapping things up. We've covered a lot of ground in terms of what the trends and the opportunities are in terms of the use of AI in education, some examples of where Copilot's really fantastic, but also some considerations about what would make Copilot and generative AI successful in your campus or institution. And a big part of that is that getting AI ready, right? So, Kevin, do you want to just recap that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, ensuring that because we know AI is only as good as the data that feeds it. And the other axiom we're seeing is that data is messy, complex, and risky. It's grown organically over the years without the same amount of governance or attention that it needs. So being able to then move to a position where we're using good data, we are compliant with our industry regulations, and ultimately we trust the information that the AI tools are producing for us.
Yeah, I think that's pretty critical. So I think the key crux of today's very short webinar, we covered a lot of stuff, but your AI success relies on your data strategy, right? And having good data provides the fuel for successful insights and recommendations, and more importantly, trustworthy AI. And this is heavily tied in with the knowledge management strategy, as you're saying.
Yeah, and ultimately, from when it comes, I think back to that IBM report and how we need some type of technology, the guardrails that we've talked about, to ensuring that only the most relevant content is surfaced, and ultimately that you protect your organization and your data estate going forward.
Fantastic. I mean, yeah, remember the Copilots are meant to be there to save time, right? And be helpful. And if it's not helpful, if it's not saving time, if it's not adding value and people don't trust it, then it's not really adding to that experience, right? So, this is not just about security fundamentals and security principles, but it comes all the way through to the end user's impact and their usability and their experience as well. So in terms of how we help, Kevin, I think, obviously we jointly like to get together and help our clients. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the offer that you've got at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, if all of what we've been talking about today is something that resonates, it's something you're looking at the moment, or you're getting a lot of pressure to really accelerate your generative AI journey, we've got a bite-sized turnkey assessment that would help you along that path. So our goal is to give you that objective inventory of where your data is. I really like I think of this as an equation. When I think of risk, I'm looking for sensitivity and exposure in my data. And that risk matrix you can see an example of here helps articulate that and tell a really good story for organizations that are starting down this generative AI path. So it's not exclusive to Copilot, but very aligned with Copilot's capabilities, given that our focus here is inside of your Microsoft 365 environment.
Yeah, and I really love that because this is both a blend of consulting and automation, really accelerates that time to value and provides those deep insights, like you said, like the heat map and the risk index to give quantifiable results, right? And things that you can immediately action.
Exactly.
And by the way, yeah, if you're interested in getting that stood up, follow the link here. It will take you to the Netrix website and just mention AVPT webinar in the How Did You Hear About Us box, and that'll make sure it hits both mine and Kevin's radar so we can actually be in touch directly as well if you've got further questions. But in addition to that, thank you everybody for your time today. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us, and thank you, Microsoft, for helping host us. Outside of this, you can catch us both on LinkedIn for any other questions, and appreciate your time today. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.